Okay, well, welcome everyone. Rod, if you want to let people on as they come on, we'll get through this. We're talking today about PI and using it for workforce planning and succession. This is a big topic lately for a lot of our clients, just because we have a lot of people moving out. We're transitioning a lot of people out. People are moving in. The statistics, if you look at them, I won't share them today again, but just with the boomers moving out, and we've got other generations moving in, but they especially like the in between. I don't think we do a great job of helping people understand what the next step is and where they're going, and where that possibility is, and that kind of distracts us from keeping those better employees a lot of times. So this is going to be heavy on the questions for you guys. So the interactive piece would be much appreciated today, unless you just want me to ask a bunch of questions and let you go. All right. But when we look at when we look at planning for the future, a couple questions here. And again, if you want to interact, that would be great to have some interaction here to understand where people were at and what you're thinking, even if you're thinking of it for yourself. What's the cost of not knowing your people's natural strengths when planning for the future? And then the bigger question to ask you is, does your current workforce structure reflect where your is going or where it's been? Um, and that could mean just not your people. It's like, what else are we doing? I mean, that could be things like is marketing, that could be sales, that could be different products and things of that nature. But I mean, anybody want to take a crack at answering that question of the cost of not knowing people's natural strengths when planning the future or your own even?
They're in the wrong role. They could be in the wrong role over.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's
Uh,
considerable. You have the turnover to deal with as well. I mean, that's a big price.
yeah. And not to mention the confusion. So what I've found in working with a lot of clients is like the confusion over, hey, what's the next step? Where am I going? I have a lot of people, even when I go inside a company, will pull me aside and say, hey, look, I just don't know the direction. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. And a lot of this could be taken off the table if we just had some correct um, ways, plans, development plans, and some way to attack this that just isn't, for lack of a better term, lackadaisical in nature. Like we do a lot of us do our business well, but we don't take time to take on the people and look at what they're doing. All right. Might start delegating things to them to make them more overwhelmed and not feel supported. Yep, that could happen too. That's in the chat there. And then, the current workforce structure that you have. And I think we always need to check this. And I know some of you that are on the CFV team, even like we need to check this all the time, right? What should we be thinking of like in the future, the next quarter, the next year, the next 3 years? Does that reflect where business is going and where it's been? So when people say, you've added a couple things, so I'm going to use our experience for you guys that are on the line here. So we've added a few things, especially the past couple years, that complement the services that we're already doing. We added the adventure piece. Some of that wasn't necessarily uh, some of that net wasn't necessarily where the business was going. In cases it was, but what we've been able to do with that and open that up, we didn't even see those possibilities at first. Uh, we've started the Dream Manager, which some of you may or may not know about. We've We're doing EOS now with our clients, so the entrepreneurial operating system that you might be familiar with, or traction. We rolled out that as well, and then the other assessments that we have. But when you look at those things and what that structure looks like and moving forward, I mean, I'm just giving you those little bites, but as you think about your company, and then not just your company, but yourself, where are you going? And then for those of you that do manage people, right? How do I help people understand where they need to go? What's the next step? Because when people are confused, that's that they get distracted and tend to go someplace else. If we had a good plan in place, and that's why I have this webinar is just inundated with questions for you to think about. So you can either, take a screenshot of the slides to be thinking about to talk with your other managers, or we'll have this recording up and going in the next couple days. We're always back to talent optimization, gang. All right. So when we look at talent optimization, we look at those four buckets, right? Design, aligning your talent strategy with your business strategy. And that's why you have to be future looking. Like, do we have the right people for 5 years from now, for 10 years from now? What do the leaders look like in the company now, and what do we need them to look like in the future? That might be Those could also be different behavioral patterns. The team might be different because of what's going on, right? Because the business strategy could change. But do we even know what the results want to be, need to be, those kinds of things? So when we look at that, we're always looking at that bridge of how to bridge that gap between strategy and results. You should always be diagnosing, right? But some of these things are hiring the right people, putting them in the right seat, and then the big piece, that inspire piece, is this is where you work on the development piece, right? And we just don't do that enough, right? We talked last month, and actually, before I go on too much further, I wanted to follow up from last month. If anybody was on that call and did any of these things, so this is I understand this isn't the topic of today, but from last month, we talked about engagement and retention, and we had some real good conversation around those things. And a couple of the questions that I asked was, how would you describe your team's current level of engagement and retention? And where do you see gaps between how your people are wired and how they're currently being managed or motivated? Why that's so important to understand, because this piggybacks on everything that we talked about last month. Because if we have a good engagement strategy, then we can set in place succession planning for the future. And it's very important to people. And those of you that have gone through the training, especially, you know that we spend a whole lot of time talking about that. And I've got some of those slides up a little bit later here. When we look at those forces of engagement, again, the have to versus the want to. Yeah, I was at an event that I was running Friday for a group of contractors, and one of the gentlemen that was there for the first time came up to me and he asked me my age, and he's like, "Man, you got a lot of energy for your age." And I was like, "I think that's a compliment, but I'll take it. I'll take it as a compliment." He's like, "Yeah, that's a compliment." He's like, "You just have so much energy." And we started talking about it. I'm like, this is something I feel like I get to do. Like I woke up I actually did wake up that morning at 2:30 in the morning ready to go, uh, because it aligns with everything of who I am, my motivation, what I want to give, and those things. If you look at other assessments that we do, like the values index and the attribute index, I mean, I was just flying high the whole day. I didn't get up thinking, "Oh, I have to do this." But the other thing is, guys, when you look at that want to list for me, right? I've created a good role for myself. I think most of the time I'm in the right role, right? I stretch my capacity every once in a while, but I'm still in the right role. Um, Management wise, I think when I look at the management of myself, and that's what I'll ask even some of you to do today, in how you engage yourself and how you engage others, because that manager piece, leader, is very, very important nowadays. Right? People don't quit their job, they quit their boss. When you have a good person who's a leader, or think about a great coach that you've had. Um, you kind of do anything for them, even when you're maybe mismatched in the role a little bit, right? You'll go that extra effort, and that's important for us to understand, to have that self-awareness of ourselves. Like, because if you're not in that want to most of the day, how are you going to get your employees and the people on your team in that want to? And the last two, I mean, I think I have a great team. A little biased there maybe, but the culture is good, which is the organization piece. But there's always ways to get better at that, right? And it's the little things, right? It's the little things that create that. It's the engagement, but what to do. So a couple more questions. And again, I warned you that this was more question laden. Uh, so when we look at this, if slow me down so we can talk about these things. If something, if this sparks a question or comment in your head, when you think about the future of your organization, how confident are you that you have the right people ready for the next level of leadership? Okay. For me, years ago, I was always the youngest one, right? There was a time when all of the people inside the company were older than me. And that is, for some reason, that is flipped, right? And that's a good thing, but what does that next level need? To think about what I needed and and to put that in place so it's not quite as difficult. And I know I've had, I see Lindsay and Caleb on the screen here. I've talked to them a lot about, hey, look, these are things I didn't get. I want to make sure you get, so it's not as difficult, so it's an easier lift. And from everything that I've seen, we're on the right path of that. But to ask yourself that question, and if you have a bunch of leaders that you're around, like I know Eric on the line here. I mean, we've talked PI for years and years and years and years, and he's always asking me leadership questions. But like, do we have the right people? Because we can't wait till everybody's 2 years from retirement and go, oh, who do we need to develop? Right? Especially in Eric's field. I know it a little bit better than maybe some other clients because they've been a client so long. But you just can't like you can't force somebody new right into a role like Eric's had for years. And you look at that company, you look at their company, and it's like you've got people with years and years of tenure and tribal knowledge. How do we pass that down? And here's the other big thing to be asking your leaders. Are you currently hiring for today or are you building for tomorrow? Currently hiring for today, or are you building for tomorrow? And that goes into your hiring process because sometimes we get all anxious because we have to have a warm body. What if we waited, right? Sometimes that pain, that discomfort gets in the way, and then we just hire that kind of person that's going to fill the gap instead of looking at, hey, look, what do we need for tomorrow? And then the questionnaire is like, what if your top three leaders left tomorrow? Who would be ready to step in? We just had this happen with a client in New York. He called and he's like, "Yeah, Eric, we just had our probably our best leader leave. He got cherry picked from an organization. Now, in that case, I don't know if the owner of the company could have done anything just because it was so much of a it was a much bigger company. The salary that came with it was something that they just couldn't do because they're a smaller company. It was ridiculously over the top. I mean, but who's going to fill that? Right? And especially in smaller companies, like they can take a big hit, but in other times that fear is so great that we we're okay with mediocre and we don't do anything and then it just keeps getting prolonged and prolonged and prolonged. How do you currently identify high potential employees? And this is a question for all of you. Is it a gut feeling? Is it performance data, behavioral insight? Um, I know a lot of companies just do it with a gut feeling, and that's where we come in a lot of times. What about you, Matt Lee? Good to see you, by the way.
Yeah, good to see you. I'd say I think of the behavioral insight. I think it's who, when you ask a question to whether it's I don't say rhetorical, but to a team, the person that says yes, I feel like those types of people say yes often, and so it's easy to then just become reliable on that person,
Mm,
which obviously can, it's always a scary place to be when, that becomes your favorite. It's trying to force certain people or certain personalities to tap them on the shoulder and give them opportunity, even when they're not saying yes. But I think our strongest leaders are always the people that say yes first.
Lindsay, Caleb, I don't know if you guys want to jump in and talk about your clients at all, but what
Uh,
do you see them doing?
well, I was just thinking when Matt was talking about this, I was reading the last question, like just identifying high potential employees, and it's like I just feel like the employees that take initiative and like come to the things that we're doing, like, if we do an event and it's in your personal time and they see them showing up and like those are the people that I want to invest in. And I think it goes back to that first question is just making sure that everybody's in the right role because like you and I talked about, Eric, like we could be accountants for a day or two, but that's not going to work in the long run. And so getting the right people in the right roles where they can succeed and then being able to like support them in their growth. And that's like for me, I'm kind of like in this middle stage, right? Where it's like uh I'm learning, like I'm learning from you, but then I also have like, Jacob, like it's kind of like
Yeah.
this learning to be a good leader.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't understand this, and this is a question that we should be asking all employees, and not just once. Um, and I'm thinking of this because you mentioned the accountant piece, because I had a young lady um, about a week and a half ago come in and I'd ask her some of these questions in preparation for the meeting, and she's only 25, 26 years old, but she was in absolute tears 10 minutes into our conversation. And I'm not over exaggerating. And she said, I just don't feel purposeful in my position. And, I could have told her had I known, right? She has your pattern, Caleb, and she went to school for accounting. All right. So she's not getting that people contact. She feels like, and it's put her in a place where she doesn't feel like she's doing good work, right? And part of identifying high potential employees is going back to what we talked about, is getting them in the right role. And that's, as we guide people, and sometimes the first couple of times they might not want to hear that, right? You might not hear that you're not the right person because you think of something, or people, like in her case, she's like, I just listened to everybody that was around me that told me I was good at that. I'm good with numbers. Okay. I'm good at working with kids, but I don't want to be a teacher all day doing the same lesson all day long and having to be patient with a bunch of fourth or fifth graders. That is not probably a good idea. I'm the fun one, right? I'm not a great, teacher over and over again for a certain age group. So thinking about that and putting time, here's the thing, putting time into identifying your high potentials, because they might not know their high potential. Because if you're looking at them and they don't know where they need to go or what they're supposed to do, they're not going to look like their high potential because they're going to be in that have to mode. When we get them in the want to mode, it's like, oh, right? A new person could show up very easily. Not all the time.
I think I have
But
a good example of this with Brownie House. So for those of you that don't know, my husband used to own a brownie bakery, and there was one guy there that was he wanted more responsibility. So kind of what Caleb was saying, he would ask for, "Hey, can I take this on?" So Christian started giving him, answering customer service emails. He was really good with customers in the store. And then at one point we decided, oh, he would, and he expressed that he would want to go out and do some networking events. Like I was more of sales. I did a BNI group, so a business networking group, and he was going to fill in or come to the group 2 times. And one time his car broke down, and then another time something else happened. Like he could not get to the networking meeting, but he could really answer emails. So if we were just going off of, it was like 2 times. They're like, "Where's your guest?" I'm like, "Now his engine light's on, and I don't know where he is now." Like he just couldn't get there, but he was really good at emails, dealing with people in the store. So it was like, okay, if we just looked at how he showed up to those or how he didn't show up to those meetings, he looked like, oh, you can't rely on this guy. But in terms of how he was in these other aspects, so that could have been cool to see his PI. We didn't use PI for that company, but to
right.
see what was his PI. Maybe he was more reserved, even though he was really good with customers. You might think he's kind of an outside sales guy, but he wasn't. So that was just an interesting to see. Like, why are you so good at this, but you cannot show up to this thing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, more questions. Identifying those high potential employees, right? Looking at who you've promoted based on performance only to find out later they weren't wired for leadership. All right. And I will say, I mean, I know we're just focused on PI today, but we have another assessment, the values index, that looks into motivation, right? And you can see if somebody's motivated to actually lead. But I want to ask you this, because that next piece for all of you, I hear this so many times. I've heard it when I began my career, and I still hear it today. Okay. When we get into that next question, which PI behavioral drives do you think are most common among top leaders? And are they the same drives your organization needs for its next phase of growth? All right. Does anybody want to take a shot at answering that or giving any insight?
Which behavioral drives that are
Yeah.
probably most common? I would say like most common would be like a high A, high B, low C. Like that would be pretty common for somebody that wants to lead like a leadership position. They're outgoing, they can network, they're charismatic, and then that they're driving, they can do a lot of tasks, keep driving the next task.
Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of what we hear in training. And sometimes the default for some leaders when we first start PI is just to, well, we just want to high in that position. We just want to high. I'm like, well, right? Be careful what you wish for because that might not be what you need. And as the company grows as well, what might have started that small company isn't what you need. You guys all remember the training when we talk about even just that AD relationship and we spend about 15, 20 minutes on the AD relationship and the growth of the company. What got us here isn't going to get us there. All right. And in my example, for those of you who, I think most of you know her. I mean, when Tammy came into the company, we needed that high C. We needed that process. I mean, she has a high C and a low A, so that implementer, or we're not going anywhere, right? And then even I know, Rod, I don't mean to call you out, but like when we introduced when you came into the company, like that's what we needed at that point of time, like to lead where he's leading. And know what he knows. I mean, and again, I mean, I use this example all the time. Like if we wouldn't have had him at that time where we shifted a lot of things again, right? That was strategic, and Rod can kind of testify to this. I mean, I gave him the the job description for the position that I wanted, and and I said, hey, look, you match this, like, but do you want it? And he is the right fit for that. And that is exactly what we need. But I will tell you, doing this years and years ago with a different team, as we were building, we were really in growth mode, but we didn't have a lot of the great systems we have in place because we had too much high A and low C. And we tried to, even though we know PI, um, the people that was working with still didn't want to slow down enough or be self-aware enough to put those pieces in place because they were too addicted to the growth. Again, careful what you wish for. Think about what you need. As that company grows, there's a natural maturation to that. When you look at the bigger companies, they're going to have more of a profile. They're bringing a Matt Lee in. They're bringing an Eric in. Melanie, I can't remember your behavioral pattern, so I apologize. Um, but what are they doing? And when we bring them in, are we overlooking them because here's what we think a leader should be versus, hey, we have a natural leader here. Because those ones, did you guys ever hear this, the squeaky wheel gets the grease?
Mhm.
So a lot of times it's that higher A, higher B that's talking all the time, that's, kind of out there and they look busy. That might not be your future leader. That might be your future chaos maker. And I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying to take a look at what patterns do you think you might be unintentionally overlooking when you're identifying future leaders? And I would piggyback off that question because I know that some of our clients, when we work with them, sometimes it's not unintentionally, it's intentionally overlooking them. Oh, they can't be a leader because they have this, because they have that label in their head, and that's not fair to the person, but it stymies the growth of the company as well because when we don't put that person into place, when we don't look at the behavioral patterns and ask ourselves, what do we need?
I think I don't, I'm trying to think of the right way to say it, but if also like kind of like to your point, Tammy, like bringing in a high C, someone that's all like out, they could come off as immovable or unchangeable, and they're constantly saying no all the time in the planning meetings. You don't want to invite those persons, those people anymore to the meeting. So once you start seeing the high C's, you want to start neglecting them off the meeting.
Hmm. Yeah, that could happen. Yep, absolutely. So, what do you think leadership really is all about when you're looking at those things and just developing people, right? When we look at somebody's just natural wiring, right? Because I've worked with a lot of and I'm just going to use the example that most companies start out with, where they, well, I need a high A, low C, I need a driver. I've talked with a lot of people that have that pattern that say, I don't want to be a leader. And the best example of that we can all probably relate to is somebody that uh, in sales. Say you have, so think about this pattern. You have somebody that's a high A, high B, low C, low D. They're really good at their job. They're really great at sales. So what happens a lot of times is we move that great salesperson into a sales manager position, and a lot of times they flop because to be a better sales manager and to manage a team takes more detail. All right. So just promoting somebody based off just their past performance, you're setting yourself up for failure sometimes when you're doing that. So let's dive into kind of this last part, and thinking about how you are as managers. And this is from the training. You should remember, the certification training with PI. Think about a manager, worst manager, best manager. And why we had those questions is because what happened with that study that we did is when you look at one, clear communications. A lot of times people leave because we're not clear on what they want. If they want to be a leader, what's the next progression there? And then this one's the big one, that last piece there of managers who don't show concern for career and personal development. Right? We have to take notice of those things with people and help not only us become self-aware, but them become self-aware. Like that young lady that I told you about. I mean, that was a huge, like, I'm thankful that, it was hard for me to watch her go through that. But on the other hand, I was like happy for her because she's only 26. She's not going to be working that job for the next 10 or 20 years and then come to the conclusion like, I'm just miserable. And for the past 20 years, I've been miserable. Right? So we're coaching her along in those things and helping people understand like there are some things that you're really good at, right? If you're going to work in a blind spot, knowing you're working in a blind spot is much better than not knowing you're working in a blind spot or thinking somebody expects you to work in a blind spot for a long period of time. Okay. And this is in your workbook, so you can go back and do this exercise with people. And I would strongly urge you to do that with looking at, their own drives, needs, and behaviors and saying, hey, look, what does this mean to you? And then not guaranteeing anything inside the company, but taking a look at what job targets are there and saying, hey, Matt, here are some things that I would suggest. I don't know if you're interested in these things, but we can certainly have discussions about them. And sometimes it's just a little bit of development, gang. It could be, hey, look, here's a book. We have some companies that just pay to put their employees through the PI training so they can understand more about themselves. I've got a gentleman that he's a second in command at a company, but when you look back 15 years ago when he was coming out of college, the company that he works for sent him to PI training all those years ago to understand himself. And so what he's done now is he's built a position inside that company that fits him most of the time. So he's not going against the grain. But it took a lot of work. And these are conversations we need to be having consistently, right? Because there's some things that's like, oh, I didn't realize I was still doing that, right? All right. So creating development plans based on behavioral insights. And this is as much for you individually as it is for the people that you're going to be working with. Okay. Are the development plans truly individualized or did they follow a check the box format? I would say that the majority, I'm going to give it an over 80, close to 85% with our clients are just check the box. When it goes into that individualized piece, these are the conversations that you're having. And but also this is one of the reasons we went with something like the Dream Manager because that gives us a curriculum to talk about what's the next step for you? What do you need? Right? And you can see that inside of companies that have used that curriculum. It's not just check the box anymore. It's about, hey, look, this is me as a leader. I'm thinking of one manufacturing company that we have. We have this one young lady that we identified as a leader, but she's so quiet. She's young, she's quiet, she doesn't have confidence, or she didn't have confidence. She does now because she's in the second year of that program. And, what she thought was a deficit was actually something that turned into be a strength, right? Because she was coming in, oh, I'm not like everybody else. Well, yeah, you're not. That doesn't mean you can't be a leader, but do you want to be a leader? And the things that she's doing for that general manager inside of the one plan are amazing. And that's just over a year. And that wasn't just because we did a end of the year review, check the box kind of thing. It was some of the things that I'll go over with you today that I've gone over with you and some of the questions that we've asked. But I would ask you to make it more individualized to the person, right? Because some of these conversations can somehow be difficult, but I think all of us want that. Like we just want a place where we can talk about, okay, what's the next step, right? Um, yeah, I'll go use Lindsay as an example because she's a brand new mom, right? It's like, what's going on? Like, what's going on in your head, right? How can we support that? Is this the right place for you? And it is, thank goodness, right? But it's not just to check the box, all right? It's truly individualized. And again, the more we can do that, that's that stickiness, right? Because I don't want to preach too much on here or get too much of a soapbox, but we're all hardwired for connection and we're all hardwired to be part of a good tribe. And when we feel that trust with everybody around us, and when we're taking care of each other, and it's not just, oh, check the box, nobody looks forward to those check the box conversations. I know when we do like our dream manager all together, I mean, I get really excited for that, right? And when we do it inside of other companies, really exciting. When people are able to accomplish things they didn't think they were going to be able to accomplish, or, you know, accomplish a goal that they thought was way out of reach. And so these development conversations inside your company, do they focus on who someone is versus what they do? Right? Another good question to be asking yourself, and especially if you're a manager and you're asking these things, or even who they want to become. Like, what are your aspirations here? Some people just want to stay in that position and lead where they're at, or maybe they don't want to lead at all. I've seen a lot of people where that's happened to them, where they've gotten pushed into a position because they've done really well in a certain position and they never asked for it. Right? I remember one company, this has been, probably 15 plus years ago. The owner one day decided he was going to promote this guy to VP. So he came in one day without consulting him, gave him a brand new company car, gave him a huge raise, Said, here's what you're going to do. You've got a company credit card. You've got this, you've got that. And then after I think it was 3 months or maybe it was 6 months, the guy came in and said, I don't like this. Like, I don't want to do this. And I never asked for it. And fortunately, the owner, had an aha moment and said, hey, look, I don't want to lose you. Do you want your old position back? He said, if I can, I would love to have my old position back. My point is, like, what conversations are you having? Are you having any? Like, what would it look like if every employee had a growth plan tailored to the behavioral strengths and blind spots? If we had those discussions, and sometimes they don't have to be overly formal, right? I mean, the bigger the company is, we want to make sure we're tracking that. But sometimes it's just, and these are like, I'm thinking of Matt and his boys here, right? Like, as your boys grow up and develop, Matt, these are good questions just to ask them, right? Because they're all different, right? But the youngest one might be looking at the older one saying, hey, I want to be like my big bro. And that might not be who he is. And if we don't have those conversations, he grows up thinking he needs to be that, right? And hopefully you guys can relate to that, right? And in talking to people and helping them understand what their true giftedness is, right? And we always talk about, what's the best version of yourself? Are you bringing the best version of yourself to work, right? What are and are there life changes, right? Lindsay just had a life change. Tammy and I are about to have a life change. We're going into that, place as grandparents. Like, some of these questions I got to ask myself, like, what's going on? What do I, can I, if I build this next generation up inside my company, I get to step away more often and enjoy what I want to enjoy a little bit more, which are my grandkids. But we never ask these questions. And if you do, your company will be better off for it. Right? Remember that statistic I shared with you, this last one here? Showing concern for their career and personal development. When you do that, you increase that engagement, and then you can have the conversations over succession planning. What's the next step for you? Even if it might be in the distant, like way far off in the future. That making sense? So how do you start? With PI, it's as simple as the management strategy guide. Then again, I don't want you to just check the boxes. I want you to use that second page and not just use it to bring the second page out. Like, think about those questions as you have discussions with people. Are you asking these things, or are you just paying attention? Hey, did you get this, and this done? Instead of, and that's good to do. I mean, they have to do their job. But the other thing is, what else is on your mind? All right. I love giving people books. Like, when I hear something and it's like, yeah, hey, what you try this book, right? What's funny is that gentleman that I told you that came out right out of college and his company sent him right out of college into the training, and now he's, whatever that is, 13 or 14 years later, he's now the VP there, right? But we've been talking for so long that every time I see him, he's like, Eric, what are you reading right now? And as soon as I tell him, he opens up his Audible and he buys it. Like, we've just gotten into that cadence where it's, and now he's given me some recommendations, which is pretty cool. If you don't have this for yourself, please do it for yourself. Okay, first, and then try it with others. You'll see that it's not as hard of a conversation as you think it is, and and you can sometimes ditch some of the formality here. I mean, I think you should be doing this at least once a quarter with people. But a lot of companies that don't talk about this is where they see they can't develop a succession plan because it's just a revolving door. Everybody's coming in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. The other tool that you can use for that is also the coaching guide, right? To help people understand from a visual perspective, even, right? And again, this isn't a one and done. Remember, people need to hear it often and consistently. What's the gaps here? Well, I'm not just being a jerk of a manager. Here's what, here's the position. Here's how you have to be. Right. And I'll give you guys a great example. There's an, PI has in 2026, we'll have a whole different slide deck and everything for our training, right? That we have to follow for the new software and things like that. You know, you might think, oh, a new training, it's the same A, B, C, and D. That doesn't change. It's just to somebody that has a low D like Caleb, Lindsay, and I, it's like, oh my gosh, like I gotta learn something else here. Like, yeah, it just sounds like structure and micromanagement, right? But the thing of it is, we only have to do it for a time, right? So we'll dig into that for a couple weeks, and then we'll be pros at it, right? But it's like like, but if we had to do it all the time, that isn't gonna work. All right, we're not going to build a good team. We're not going to have a good culture. But having somebody understand what's required of the role, not just the role that they're in, but maybe the role, like if you can bring those job targets in, because in the software, you can, I think all of you probably know this, but you can put the person in and then you can put, what jobs match that person. And if you have all the job targets in the company, then you can actually physically see what they might be good at. The other thing is you might need to, if you really want that person, you might have to create a position for them. What the, you might look at how do we be creative inside of this company. And then the last thing that I would, I always go over is the relationship guide, looking at yourself as a manager and how to best coach that person. Because sometimes coaching that person, that means we have to shift a little bit. But when that other person understands that we're shifting and we're adapting, you typically get that reciprocated back to you.